And we're starting the live stream. We're down to 3 minutes until we go live on BTR. And it's going to be an interesting show today because I have a lot of stuff planned, and I don't think it's possible I can get through it all. But we will see. 2 minutes. We will see how far I can get. It's a lot of material. We'll see how far we get. Hi, thank you for joining. We're down to 2 minutes before the show, and we will see what happens. I have a great interview to share. I'm kind of excited. The stuff I have to cover, I don't know if I can cover it all today. So a lot of surprises, and I have a possibility of some surprise guests. We'll see. We'll wait and see. God is good. This is a Christian news show. For those of you unaware, cover the news in a pretty broad forum. And today we're going to be talking a lot about anti-Semitism. Okay, 1 minute till we go live. And because YouTube is fussy about music, I don't play my intro here, which I probably could, but I'm actually thinking about getting a new intro done, so we'll work on that. But this is quite a show that I have coming up. I have the intro for BTR, but I'm just worried about the music, copyrights and stuff, and I know there isn't anything, so there's no intro on my end of this, on this end, I should say. We're going live in under a minute, I believe now. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, welcome to the Sutliffian Report. Last week I didn't share any news, and I shared my friend Cal Fritzy's reading of the Alienoric Way, one incredible allegory written by Matthew Brocken. So this week I have a lot of news to share, and I have an interview with Norman Cantor to share. But because this is a Christian news show, I want to start with a reading of God's Word. Today we're starting in 1 John 5:7. Here we go. This then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. That's powerful stuff. Jesus is the one whom the apostles follow. His message, being a message from Jesus, God's Son, that message declares the excellence of God, that there is no darkness within him. In Taoism and other Asian beliefs, there's a doctrine that there's no light without darkness. God's calling that belief a lie. In him, there is no darkness. In him, there is no lie, no deception. In him is all the glory and goodness we hope and dream of. Why worship anything else? Why believe in anything but his greatness? Why settle for a belief that belittles something men would call a God? Our God is so much bigger. Dear Lord Jesus, you must be lifted up. Oh, may your glory not be given to another. May we live singing praises to your name for your wonderful work and saving grace of which we aren't even worthy. Lord, use us that we can share your boundless love with others. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I have, like I've been saying, some incredible lineups here. Norman Cantor's article I encountered as I was doing some research, looking at news, and it's an article that has an academia's demonstrable bias against Israel. And as a former educator, I taught social studies for 20 years in the role of a special education teacher. That's that I should say, the special education teacher in the role of a social studies teacher. And I've been watching this growing anti-Semitism. My biggest problem with watching this is there's not much you can do. Watching something and seeing it happen on the sidelines and knowing something's wrong and you don't know what to do, it's scary, especially when you know it's evil. Well, Norman is documenting this. Dr. Michael Vanyukov is documenting this. And, and I've been trying to figure out what to do. Well, you know what? The parents have it right. Getting involved in their kids' education is what's going to change things. I'm loving seeing that with the parents. So without further ado, let me pull this up. I've got to get back to BTR and then get to the YouTube video share, and the joy of too much on the screen. What happened? All right. Something. Okay, here we go. Just going down. The joy of having too much on the screen and doing something live is never, it's not always easy to get through. All right. So let me just pull this down to my videos. And we're getting there. All right, so I'm just going to start this on BTR. All right. All right. Report. Norman Cantor. It's so exciting to have someone who understands the importance of the changes in academia and how that is affecting what is being taught to college and university students, down to those that teach in the local high schools. Mr. Cantor, you started out your analysis on the topic of how academia is treating Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, with especially the recent one, with a discussion on how controversial issues should be dealt with in academia. Mr. Cantor, can you please tell us how controversial issues should be handled in academia?
Well, first of all, when you're talking about academia, I expect academics to be engaged in analysis and the weighing of divergent viewpoints and the presentation of plausible divergent points of view, as opposed to simply the promotion or advocacy of a single point of view. And that's what set me off about the academic declarations following the outbreak of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in May. they were not. They had no academic integrity. There was utter neglect of a divergent point of view, simply engaging in sloganeering instead of analysis, and what I would call demonization of Israel by the one-sided, distorted presentation that was being given in these declarations.
Thank you. You know, you looked at the 11-day war between Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist entity. An organization in the United States declared a terrorist entity against an ally of the United States, and how faculty groups at scores of universities, including Princeton, Brown, Vassar, and CUNY, which is the City University of New York, have issued utterly one-sided, distorted, and inflammatory statements backing the Palestinian version of history of events. What did you find, Mr. Cantor?
What did I find in their analyses and in their declarations?
Yes.
So as I mentioned, I consider it a total lack of academic integrity and misconduct to simply engage in a one-sided advocacy, accepting a myopic acceptance of one narrative without any serious consideration of the opposing narrative. It's distorted and a breach of academic integrity.
My term for that is academic malfeasance. I'm a retired teacher. Yeah, it's just social studies. I taught social studies for 20 years in high school, and this stuff just disgusts me because I've seen it. I did start to laugh at some things that are being taught today. So, I'm a retired teacher. I'm obligated to teach about Israel and the history of the quote. I call it the Islamic controlled area, the Muslim controlled area, but a history of Palestine as well as a history of Israel and what the name. I teach about what the name Palestine means. I have an obligation to teach this stuff. I taught that, you addressed one of the lies in academia, which I think is incredibly important, and I wish more people would do this. You addressed the topic that academia is saying that Israel was founded as a colonialist empire. Can you tell us why that's not only misinformation, it's a blatant lie?
I certainly agree that it's a blatant lie. Colonialism is the invasion of a country by a foreign entity in order to exploit local resources. And there's a lot of reasons why Israel's presence and the Jewish presence in Palestine is not colonialist at all. First of all, the settlement that is so controversial, or the notion of Jewish settlement in Palestine, there was no existing country when the settlement process started in the middle of the 19th century. Palestine was a province of the Ottoman Empire and was sparsely populated, and there was certainly no existing country there. So the people, the Jewish settlers who came to Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were not colonialists at all. They were simply they were refugees fleeing persecution in Russia and in Europe, and returning to their ancient homeland where the Jews had historically had significant ties. They settled in Palestine. Those Jews settled in Palestine just as Arabs settled in Palestine over the same period from various points in Arabic countries outside of Palestine. And the Jews who sought refuge in Palestine were the same as the Arabs seeking refuge, except the Jews were returning to their ancient homeland. Moreover, colonialists are aimed at oppressing the local population and exploiting natural resources. And that was certainly not the case in Jewish settlement in Israel. There were always steps to preserve the rights and interests of the native population. And for example, in 1948, when the modern state of Israel emerged, the Declaration of Independence fully recognized and preserved the rights and interests of the existing population and treated them equally. So there are just a number of substantial distinctions between colonialist behavior and how Israel was resettled by Jews in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
You would also think one of the things Israel has done is take land in wartime, but they have also returned land better than they received it, correct?
Absolutely. When they did have occupation of land, and there was a full effort on the part of the Arabs to accept Israel and make peace with Israel, Israel invariably responded favorably. And that includes Egypt and the Suez Peninsula, that includes Jordan, and so Israel has shown that it is quite responsive to negotiated settlements for people who genuinely accept Israel's right to exist, as opposed to Hamas, which does not.
One of the other things I want to talk about is one of the things that really disgusts me that is taught in the United States in many schools. It's the claim that Israel is an apartheid state. My way of dealing with that in the last school I worked with was putting a flag of Israel up after the teacher taught that Israel was an apartheid state. I got a lot of questions after that, but they could see I was not supporting what the other teacher was claiming. So, can you tell us what's your take on the concept of Israel being an apartheid state?
Yeah, the use of the slogan "Israel is an apartheid state" I see as a malicious effort to demonize Israel and to try and make it a pariah state, but it is vastly different from the South African precedent, which was genuine apartheid, which meant state-imposed segregation and separation according to race. Arabs, as I just mentioned, starting with the Declaration of Independence in 1948, have enjoyed full political and social rights in Israel. Every day, I live in Israel much of the year, and every day I see the expressions of reflections of Arab rights. First of all, the representation in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, and right now even the participation of a small Arab party is part of the governing coalition.
So you're saying that this claim of apartheid, which never, so you're saying there are Arab representatives, there are non-Jewish representatives in the Knesset, correct?
In the Knesset, yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And in the governing coalition today.
that should destroy these claims. I never
That's
get that.
only one. That's only one index. The index further index is that Arabs are tremendously integrated into Israeli life. Residentially in some cities such as Jaffa and Haifa, but integrated fully into the professions and into the university. The percentage of Arab students at Tel Aviv University is consistent with the percentage of Arabs in the population. Every day, I can shop in Arab-owned stores. I deal every day with Arab nurses, physicians, and technicians. the majority of what do you call it I'm thinking of the Hebrew word Beit Merkachat, the drugstores, the druggists. The majority of professional druggists are Arabs, and every time I go to pick up a prescription, I'm reminded of that. And if you want further proof, there's a article by Richard Goldstone, who was a justice of the who was a justice in the South African Supreme Court and well knew what apartheid was like. And he has an article in the New York Times from several years ago where he says that Israel is vastly different from the apartheid regime of South Africa.
I have to look for that now. Thank you. The claim that Israel engaged in a genocidal campaign against Gaza civilians, it was shocking to me. Israel has such a belief in the importance of all life. I mean, it's not only Jewish, it's all life. I don't know how anyone who has any sense of academia can fall for this, but what is your response to that claim?
Yeah, again, the use of the slogans genocide and ethnic cleansing as applied to Israel's conduct toward the Palestinians is outrageous because it ignores that, first of all, that the killing the bombardments that Israel has had to initiate are defensive bombardments in a defensive effort in response to thousands of missiles and projectiles that Hamas has launched against Israel. And that includes approximately 8,000 missiles since Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007. And in a particular conflict in May, on May 10th, the day before Israel started its bombardments, Hamas sent 150 missiles into Israel, which killed 2 people and caused extensive property damage. And that was the start. It was a defensive effort to try and cut off the attacks that Hamas had been launching. Secondly, and just as important, during the course of these defensive efforts, Israel Defense Forces did and customarily do make extraordinary efforts to prevent the killing of civilians. And that includes making phone calls to buildings that are likely targets because of their military of Hamas's military presence or use of the building. And Israel also has a lawyer attached to every unit that's selecting targets to make an effort to make sure that the targets being selected are indeed predominantly military targets, and that steps are being taken to avoid civilian casualties. There's a British military expert named Richard Kemp with extensive military presence, and he has written, his name is Richard Kemp, Kemp. Just look that up if you want his endorsement of how Israel takes extraordinary steps to avoid civilian casualties.
I think it's quite a statement that the PLO and the Hamas, in truth, if they were so worried about genocide, I have to say, why do their leaders seek medical treatment in your hospitals? That's true, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure that Hamas's leaders seek treatment, but they certainly send their relatives to Israeli hospitals. But I don't see that as it's a testimony to Israel's humanitarian treatment as opposed
exactly
to genocidal treatment. There are other indexes of their humanitarian treatment, and that is a supply of electric and water and fuel to Gaza, so long as Hamas is not bombarding Israel and showering Israel with missiles. Israel is cooperative in providing assistance and humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza.
So they don't have their own electricity. They haven't created any electronic. They've dug tunnels. They've spent money on solidifying tunnels. They spent money on military weapons, the government, but have not spent anything in what we would call infrastructure, like supporting their own electrical type thing.
No, I wouldn't be quite that extreme. But the truth is that Hamas has diverted billions of dollars from their urgent civilian needs and instead invested that money in a network of military tunnels, a vast network of military tunnels, and in missiles and in buying weaponry and getting smuggling weaponry into Gaza for use against Israel. And it's that kind of Hamas misconduct toward its own population that got ignored in all this academic commentary.
So one of the things I wanted to say, I do want to say thank you. I don't know if you know, but one of my beliefs as to why this academic malfeasance is happening in the United States is in the 1960s, the Muslim Brotherhood started to come into America. And they said phase one was done, that they were here, and they were starting phase two, which was getting into the colleges to change the way we think. So it supposedly started in 1963, just to go back that far back. I continue to write about and expose this stuff, and I am glad that you called it out. I wanted to say thank you. It's becoming more and more brash and more open, and what I guess surprises me is the move to not do your own, that a lot of the students today in colleges and universities aren't doing what I would consider your own research type thing, where they're not finding out if a professor is right, they're just accepting it as right, rather than I missed that kind of concept when I was growing up, where I was always taught that you have to find out what's right rather than accept. But I want to say thank you for your work. You did a survey of Jewish students in American colleges and universities. I did want to ask a question about that before I say goodbye. What did you learn from that?
Well, it's not my personal survey, but a survey was done by reputable organizations, and they discovered that the Jewish students on campus are intimidated. People who identify or show their Jewishness are definitely being intimidated by this anti-Zionist one-sided propaganda that they hear from these academics, and they're intimidated by these academics and by student groups on campus, like Students for SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, which are engaged in harassment of any people who identify themselves as Israel supporters, or as accepting Israel's right to exist.
There is theory out there, just to let you know, that the founder of SJP had relations with Hamas before he came over here, and before he started SJP. And in the United States, the Muslim Student Association, which is the first Muslim Brotherhood organization in the United States, they have what's called an incestuous relationship with each other. They have the officers of, like, you'll have the president of the Muslim Student Association be like the vice president of the SJP, or the treasurer or something like that. So they interchange their officers, like most of the Muslim Brotherhood organizations here in the United States. I am one of those fighting to have them labeled a terrorist entity. but my goal is to get what it comes down to is I just want the truth out. I'm tired of the misinformation about Israel. I'm so grateful that you continue to work for this to get the truth out, and I want to say thank you, Mr. Cantor. How can people follow your work and get to read more of what you're doing?
Well, I do have a personal blog, and which you can find through Norman Cantor, and I'm I'm retired from academia, so I write less than I used to, but you can find my blog pieces just by Googling me, and I do periodically, a few times a year, write the kind of piece that you saw about the academic misconduct in May.
I have to say it was wonderful. Now, that was in honest reporting, and I love to read their articles, and I do recommend everybody read those. Thank you again, Mr. Cantor. God bless.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
All right. So now we're back on both platforms. I had to wait for the StreamYard to catch up, the YouTube and Facebook to catch up. So Norman Cantor, he might be a little bit older, but he is as sharp as a tack and is 100% accurate on the anti-Semitism in academia. I mean, I have been covering this and covering it. There's reasons why I think this is important. Who gets attacked first? It's the Jews. Who gets destroyed first? It's the Jews. Why do they do that? Why would they attack God's chosen people? Because what they're doing is against God. It's that simple. It is that simple. And they can't handle that God has a chosen people. So we're talking about the communists. We're talking about the followers of Islam have this great hatred against Israel. And wherever you see those organizations, Islamic or communist or socialist, that's one of the things you're going to keep seeing. What does that say about what's happening in your local college and university? People, you need to wake up. So let's talk about academia today. Now, one of the things I want to cover this week, which is kind of shocking to me. This one hit me. I saw this article in Epoch Times. This story came out really this week, but it needs to be closely watched. Is Penn State University's plan for their employees to be re-educated for refusing a jab. When I first saw this story and I read it, I had to stop and I had to reread it. I had to reread it again. Why? Because re-education camps are something communists and socialists do, not Americans, not colleges and universities. Unless we're now saying that communists and socialists so run our colleges and universities that if you don't agree with them, they won't allow you to graduate unless you've been re-educated and you have to accept and tell and repeat their beliefs. This gets scary. Let me read some of this to you. Again, this comes from Epoch Times. It's called Penn State Employees Who Refuse Vaccination Face Re-Education. It's by Beth Braley. Came out yesterday. Despite a federal judge declaring President Joe Biden's vaccine mandate unconstitutional, Penn State University will keep its January 4th deadline requiring employees to get vaccinated. And listen to this. Some employees who choose not to get vaccinated will be given education and counseling. Do you hear this? Re-education. Okay, so in the re-education, are they going to talk about the million people that are dead? According again, CDC has a reporting place in it. It's called VAERS, VAERS. Please go there. Please download that information. Over 18,000 recorded dead from the vaccines. Now, CDC claims that VAERS data is 1% of reality. So that means 1,800,000 are dead from the vaccines. Will they be mentioning this information in those education and counseling sessions? So who really needs to be educated here? I'm extremely concerned. Now, I want to read more of this because I think this is the person everybody needs to write to. I'm going to mention this guy's name. Quote, many of you know the mandate is being challenged in the courts, so we don't know the outcome of the process yet. But we are planning around it prevailing, and so implementing that implement the mandate. Penn State Provost Nicholas P. Jones said Tuesday in the University Faculty Senate meeting. We've got to prepare because there's a lot of runway between now and January the 4th. Really? I mean, I don't know about you, but that's not a lot of time to put a curriculum together to re-educate people. Are you going to include in it the dangers of these vaccines? Are you going to include in it how they got labeled vaccines? Are you going to include in there that FOIAs have been filed to get permission to review the approval of this, what data that the FDA received to approve these vaccines, and they have been refused. These FOIAs have been refused. So, will they put that in those re-education things? My guess is not. We have to be careful for ourselves and being wise. It's part of the job of being a believer, part of the job of just being a good citizen. So, I mean, I see great value in staying informed. So let me go back and kind of build this in. This next story is from last week, and I didn't share the next story. Fox News shared part of the ongoing saga in Loudoun County, Virginia, which has a local sheriff responding to misinformation. And I don't know if you've been following this story, but I have been staying up because something because it's education, and there's just so much that just is screaming something is wrong to me. Well, and this is because I'm a retired educator. I understand the administration. I understand how this whole system works in education. I don't like it. I'll tell you that. I don't necessarily agree with it. But when I see some of these things, it makes me say something is off. So Loudoun County Sheriff, this is by Tyler O'Neill in Fox News. Loudoun County Sheriff says school district enabled second sexual assault. Now, this is actually an important article because the superintendent had been saying one thing and lying to the public. And I will say that, lying. This is where the Loudoun County Sheriff has a duty to press charges of defamation of character against the Loudoun County Public Schools superintendent. The article starts, Loudoun County Sheriff accused the school district superintendent of taking actions that enabled a male student who had sexually assaulted a girl in a girls' restroom to go on to assault another student in another public school. The sheriff also questioned the superintendent's promised investigation into the results. Loudoun County Sheriff Michael Chapman made these claims in response to Loudoun County Public Schools Superintendent Scott Ziegler, who had sent a letter accusing Chapman's office of failing to meet the requirements of Virginia law in notifying the LCPS about the charges the male student faced. Now, we know thanks to whistleblowers and things, that information that the sheriff is saying is true. My question is, does this not mandate this guy losing his job? Do you want someone who is willing to take a chance on a sexual assault, person who does sexual assault on a teenager? Granted, he is a teenager. Are you willing your daughters to be at risk around this man? If not, my question is, why do you keep that particular man there? I mean, I have a lot of questions. Why allow that? So I'm going to be going on. This is just one of those things that blows my mind when I think about it. On the vein of public schools, the Virginia School Board Association removed its membership in the National School Board Association last week. This is because the National School Board Association chose to ask the FBI to investigate parents who have concerns about what their children are being taught in schools. And the FBI has started classifying parents. Yes, they have a team investigating parents for being good parents and being involved in their children's education. This is insane. So, I mean, it says something. It really does say something. What is happening? Well, the parents are becoming aware of what their children are being taught and find a need to do something. Now, this next piece I'm going to play, I I listened to this and it just is mind numbing to me. Um, Ted Cruz is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was interviewing a radical leftist for the possibility. This is the part that should get you, of the possibility of being put on a federal court as a judge. He's a Biden nominee for a judicial position. You have to listen to this to believe it. Oh my gosh, you have to hear it to believe it.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In his first year in office.
Okay. And my screen has frozen. Not cool. Looks like we have a stream issue. And I have a stream issue going on here. Oh boy, oh joy of joys. Some things just don't work sometimes. Here we go.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In his first year in office, President Biden has made a pattern of nominating extreme partisans and radicals to serve in the administration, but especially to serve on the bench. And unfortunately, that pattern continues today. Mr. Ho, you will not be surprised that I want to address some questions to you. And in my view, your record reflects that same pattern of finding someone who has been an extreme partisan, who has been a radical, and President Biden trying to put judicial robes on that partisan and radical agenda. And I would note at the outset that that's not just my characterization. You yourself have described yourself as, quote, a wild-eyed leftist, and further as someone, quote, accused sometimes of seeing discrimination everywhere you look. Is that right?
Senator Cruz, I think the key word in that quote is accused. What I was doing...
Let's start with the first one, wild-eyed sort of leftist.
Well, again, Senator Cruz, I think I was characterizing how others have caricatured myself.
Okay. Well, let's take a quote you wrote in November 2017, and I found it amusing, the exchange a moment ago with one of the Democratic senators about, some older intemperate statements. I would note, just sitting here, this may be a first in that you have tweeted attacks at multiple members of this committee, including Senator Lee, Senator Cotton, Senator Blackburn, Senator Cornyn, and far from being intemperate statements when you were a teenager, most of these tweets occurred last year. So in the last 12 months, you have engaged, or the last about 18 months, you have engaged in partisan attacks on multiple members of this committee. But you also wrote in November 2017, quote, in these dark times, I've been fortunate to find tremendous sense of purpose in my work as a civil rights lawyer. But as a colleague of mine asked me over lunch recently, Dale, do you do this because you want to help people or because you hate conservatives? What he was getting at is that anger can in fact be a tremendous source of power. For me, righteous indignation can provide a sense of moral clarity and motivate the long hours needed to get the work done. But it's only a short-term burst. It's not sustaining in the long run. Mr. Ho, if you wake up and are Judge Ho, and I recognize that New York is a blue state, but imagine there is someone who considers himself or herself a conservative in the state of New York, who, God forbid, finds themselves in a courtroom where you're wearing a robe. What comfort do you think that litigant would have that you described the hatred of conservatives, the righteous indignation, the anger at conservatives as a tremendous source of power for you personally? How does that possibly give anyone comfort that you would be a fair and impartial judge?
Thank you, Senator Cruz, for giving me an opportunity to address this. As I mentioned to some other members of the committee, this was a comment that I made in church where I was relaying a joke that someone else had told, the point of which was that that kind of temporary sugar rush from being angry at someone, while it can feel powerful in a moment, it's not the kind of thing that is sustaining for a human being in the long run. That at the end of the day, if you want to do good work in the world, it has to come from a different place, a place of love for your fellow person. And that's what I was trying to convey to my fellow congregants at my church.
Well, that's not what you said. And what you said is you described hatred and righteous indignation directed at conservatives. And I would note that that's a pattern that also continues. You know, a minute ago you talked about how you're dedicated to equality. And I will say, looking at your record, that is not in fact the case. Your record instead is a partisan view. So, for example, you were a graduate of the Yale Law School. The Yale Law School has an open policy of discriminating against Asian Americans. One of the first things that Joe Biden's Justice Department did was dismiss the investigation against Yale because today's Democratic Party believes discriminating against Asian Americans in admissions is an acceptable form of bigotry. Do you agree with the Biden administration on that?
Senator Cruz, I haven't followed the ins and outs of what the Biden administration has done with respect to that particular matter. What I can tell you,
Do you agree with your alma mater's policy of discriminating against Asian Americans in admissions?
Well, Senator Cruz, I'm a member of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. I try to do what I can in the Asian American legal community. I'm not aware of a particular policy of discrimination in admissions at Yale Law School, but I think
This is Biden's best, the person that he considers the best. I want you to think about that. And there's no sense of fairness in this man. And then he obviously states he wants to go against conservatives. And that's an open, blatant statement made in a public forum in a church. I just when I listen to these things, I do kind of sit there in shock. This next piece I have should also blow your mind. One of my friends, Todd Bensman, he works for the Center for Immigration Studies, and he just did this video for the Center for Immigration Studies that reveals President Biden is using some of President Trump's work. Oh, he's gone back and he's reinstituted some things. Let's talk about those. He's gone back to deportation. This is a mind blower because, first of all, I never expected never expected Biden to go back to this. The question is, did he have a choice? Okay, we will try this again on StreamYard. Here we go.
At the McAllen, Texas airport, a South Texas border city, President Joe Biden's Department of Homeland Security carries out a secretive operation that looks like this. Charter buses pull up to a back airport entrance, like at another airport 35 miles away in Harlingen, and in nearby Brownsville, Texas, too. These 3 idling chartered buses are filled with migrant women and children from Guatemala. Plainclothes U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers in unmarked trucks open the restricted gate and lead the buses onto the tarmac. And to an unmarked chartered World Atlantic Airlines jet paid for by the U.S. government. The agents direct the migrants out and into the passenger jet, up the walkway. At least 150 migrants here. They are all being deported by air to Guatemala City under a September 2021 agreement between the 2 nations. Many observers of the mass migration border crisis might have assumed the Biden administration was allowing migrant women and children to stay in America after illegally crossing the border. That was certainly the case for the administration's first 6 months and continues at some level. But that's not strictly what's happening anymore. So what is happening here? And what's the significance to the most voluminous mass migration crisis in recorded U.S. history? What you are seeing here is only a small part of what appears to be a very significant air repatriation operation that Biden and his supporters criticized and scuttled as cruel and inhumane when Donald Trump was doing it. This jet will return to Texas and pick up load after load after load, 3, 4, and even 6 times a week. Just from November 15 through the end of November, this one plane alone flew 10 loads of migrants to Guatemala City. And the day after that, and the day after that. And so will a fleet of other jets that are contracted to the branch of DHS called ICE Air, which is running the huge new deportation machine largely out of public sight. Other planes like this Swift Air jet also at McAllen Airport or at Harlingen and Brownsville airports fill with Hondurans and El Salvadorans and are flown deep into southern Mexico to Tapachula or Villahermosa, where the Mexican government loads them onto buses and drives them southward to their home countries under a separate agreement with the Biden administration.
This is a plane arriving with deportees from McAllen, Texas. This is another woman right there going down. You see her right there arriving to the bus. There is another woman going down right there, female. It's incredible, all women.
All of these migrants only a short time earlier had illegally crossed the nearby southern border on news that President Biden was giving legal papers to almost any family with children and shepherding them into the American interior to live and work just as they had hoped. This practice spurred the mass migration of families to historic heights. But in July 2021, after 6 months of sharp escalation, the numbers hit all-time highs of 200,000 plus apprehensions per month. Political polls showed that the mass migration crisis at the southern border was becoming a serious political liability, only a year ahead of the midterm elections. Whether by coincidence or plan to get control of this politically debilitating number, the very next month, the Biden administration turned to Trump's highly deterring air repatriation solution on what appears to be a sizable scale. It has targeted the most numerous of the migrants crossing in family groups, Central Americans and Haitians. The flights under Trump, after all, had proved highly effective at deterring further migration. Who back in home countries, after all, wants to spend thousands in smuggling fees on trips that end right back home? It's unclear how many Central American migrants the Biden administration has flown home, but the numbers must be substantial, judging from public flight tracking databases, a pilot, and other sources. In August and September, the administration ramped up the flights to numbers far greater than during Trump's last year or two in office, according to the anti-deportation group Witness at the Border, which claims to track ICE Air repatriation flights. The group says there were 192 removal flights in September, including ones that sent 8,500 Haitians back to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and another 139 in October, both of which were the highest volumes in nearly 2 years. If each flight held 150 migrants, the math shows that nearly 50,000 were flown home in just September and October. For instance, between August and the last week of November 2021, this Swift Air jet flew more than 65 repatriation flights to southern Mexico, Guatemala City, and Honduras, flight records show, or 9,750. Both of these jets flew dozens of deportation missions to Haiti during the Del Rio, Texas migrant camp crisis. Have the flights worked at deterring Central Americans and Haitians? The public record shows at least a coincidence of declining apprehensions at the southern border, by nearly 30,000 fewer in October than in September, and some 8,000 fewer in September than in August when the flights started. U.S. Customs and Border Protection data shows the nationalities that decreased the most were Haitians and Central Americans. In many ways, the Biden administration's policy approaches toward illegal immigration is confusing for its inconsistencies. It lets in thousands of migrant families while flying home thousands of families. Both policies have critics and opponents. But the administration's air repatriation program has been kept mostly under wraps, probably because it is politically fraught. Advocates of mass illegal migration hammered the administration for flying home thousands of Haitians from Del Rio, while never mentioning that the administration also was flying home large numbers of other nationalities to southern Mexico and Central America. That might explain why there's no government insignia on agents, buses, or the planes.
So Todd Bensman, again, he's one of those outstanding people that go out and get the truth. This is the kind of work that we need to do, because no CNN will never cover this. Because why? Because they don't want you to know that Biden is continuing something that but he learned that Trump was doing that was right. Oh, well, that would mean that Biden was wrong in stopping it. Oh, well, you can't tell people that. Why? Because if Biden's wrong, oh yeah, that means that many of them are wrong. Nihad Awad this past week revealed CARE's agenda, calling Tel Aviv being occupied. If you haven't seen a map of Israel, I suggest you do. Tel Aviv has not been occupied. It is not near an area that is Islamic controlled in Israel. So, and then it gets humorous because Nihad Awad refuses to give the name of Jerusalem. There's a reason he refuses to give that name, because he would have to admit that it was a Jewish capital if he said Jerusalem. So again, there is a reason he does not. Again, CARE is Hamas in America, people. It is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? Hamas is the parent of. Think about this: the Muslim Brotherhood is the parent of Al Qaeda, the ones that attacked us. And these are the people that the media is listening to. You should be laughing. It gets scary when you start to think about this. Now, I'm going to start talking about Dr. Stephen Kirby's work this week. He sent this to me, and I'm I'm going to encourage everybody to go to Jihad Watch. The article came up yesterday, is CARE's complaint about the misuse of Islamic terminology actually a confession. I love Dr. Stephen Kirby's work because it's he asks the right questions. So listen to this. On August 27th of 2021, the Council of American Islamic Relations released an op-ed titled "How the Misuse of Islamic Terminology Endangers Muslim Communities." This op-ed started out Allah, Sharia, Jihad, Caliphate, Hijab. For decades, American Muslims have been working to educate political leaders and media personalities who misuse these and so many other Islamic terms when commenting on current events. Although our community has made considerable progress in improving discourse about Islam in the mainstream media and the halls of Congress, our nation's reaction to recent events in Afghanistan show that our work is far from finished, especially when it comes to two particular words that prominent voices continue to either ignorantly or deliberately abuse. Those two words were Sharia and Jihad. CARE decried how the term Sharia was misunderstood and misused by those who sought to disparage Islam. CARE wanted to set the record straight about Sharia and so address certain subjects in which CARE claimed that the term Sharia had been misunderstood and misused. So let's look at a few of those claims. I love Dr. Kirby's work. Under this heading, Sharia vastly improved the condition of women. CARE claimed that the Sharia vastly improved the condition of women with the advent of Islam. But the evidence indicates otherwise. Let's examine the claim by first looking at the latest edition of a report issued annually by the World Economic Forum. Global Gender Gap Report 2020. On page 8 of the report, we find this information. The Global Gender Gap Index was first introduced by World Economic Forum in 2006 as a framework for capturing the magnitude of gender-based disparities and tracking their progress over time. The index benchmarks national gender gaps, economic, education, health, and political criteria, and provides country rankings that allow for effective comparisons across regions and econ groups. The above mentioned Figure 1, titled The Global Gender Gap Index 2020 Rankings, is on page 9 of the report and ranks 153 countries based on the size of the gender gaps in the above four categories. Okay, again, what are we talking about? Economic, education, health, and political criteria. So think about those things. The larger the gender gap, the more inequality there is between men and women. The first country listed, Iceland, has the smallest gender gaps. The last country listed, Yemen, has the largest gender gaps. Let's look at some of the countries on this list based on the information in the World Factbook. Now, Dr. Kirby's listed in bold those countries whose major religion is Islam. Here are the top 35 countries in the smallest gender gaps. Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, 5, Nicaragua, 6, New Zealand, 7, Ireland, 8, Spain, 9, Rwanda, 10, Germany, 11, Latvia, 12, Namibia, 13, Costa Rica, 14, Denmark, 15, France, 16, Philippines, 17, South Africa, 18, Switzerland, 19, Canada, 20, Albania, 21, United Kingdom, 22, Colombia, 23, Moldova, 24, Trinidad and Tobago, 25, Mexico, 26, Estonia, 27, Belgium, 28, Barbados, 29, Belarus, 30, Argentina, 31, Cuba, 32, Burundi, 33, Lithuania, 34, Austria, and 35, Portugal. There was a country missing there. I hope you heard it. Here are the bottom 35 countries with the largest gender gaps. 119, Benin. 120, United Arab Emirates. 121, Japan. 122, Kuwait. 123, Maldives. 24, Tunisia. Let me tell you, Benin, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Maldives, Tunisia, Guinea, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Turkey, Bhutan, Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Qatar, and the Gambia Tajikistan, Jordan, Mali, Togo, Mauritania, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco, Oman, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Chad, Islamic Republic of Iran, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Syria, Pakistan, Iraq, and Yemen. As you can see, there's only one country whose major religion is Islam that is listed among the top 35 countries, with the smallest gender gaps. However, among the bottom 35 with the largest gaps, we find 29 countries whose major religion is Islam. Kerr has pointed out in its op-ed that Sharia was based on the commands of Allah in the Quran, the practices and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, Sunnah, and the consensus of the juristic scholars. Could there be a basis in the Sharia for the above results? Here is some of the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad have to say about Muslim women. 1. When witnesses are needed concerning property matters, it is preferable to find 2 men. But if you can't find 2 men, then find 1 woman and 2 or 1 man and 2 women. This is based on Quran 2:282. And get 2 witnesses out of your own men. And if there are not 2 men available, then a man and 2 women, such as you agree to for witnesses, so that if one of them, the 2 women, errs, the other can remind her. See, they don't think that women can. Yeah, that's in the Quran, people. So Allah states that 2 women are needed so they can help each other remember. Adding insult to injury, Muhammad told a group of Muslim women, I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you. The woman asked, O Allah's messenger, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion? He said, is not the witness evidence of 2 women equal to a witness of 1 man? They replied, yes. He said, this is deficiency of our intelligence. So according to Muhammad, Allah's determination that it requires the testimony of 2 women to equal that of 1 man is indication of deficiency in female intelligence. This is what we call a circular reasoning, people. If their God is stuck in circular reasoning, that means that their God is mentally ill. Think about it. The second one here, Quran 2:221, states that a Muslim woman can only marry a man who is a Muslim. On the other hand, Quran 4:3 allows a Muslim man to have up to 4 wives, and Quran 5:5 allows him to even marry Jewish and Christian women. And once the Muslim woman is married, her husband gains a tremendous amount of control over her, as Muhammad said. If I were to command anyone to prostrate before everyone, I would have commanded the wife to prostrate before her husband because of the enormity of his right upon her. Although Muhammad did say that the wife has certain rights over her husband, quote, O messenger of Allah, what are the rights that our wives have over us? He replied, that you feed her when you eat, and clothe her when you wear clothes, and that you avoid hitting her in the face or disgracing her, and that you avoid abandoning her except at home. Yeah, doesn't sound like equal rights, does it? 3, the husband is allowed to beat his wife or wives. This is stated in Quran 4:34. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women, because Allah has made one of them to excel the other. As to those women on whose part you see ill conduct, admonish them first, next refuse to share their beds, and last beat them lightly if it is useful. The Muslim scholar Ibn Kathir explained that such beating was to be neither violent nor severe. He also pointed out that scholars said the husband should beat his wife lightly, in a way which does not result in breaking one of her limbs, affecting her badly. And Muhammad himself said to beat them wise, but not with severity. Muhammad also said a man should not be asked why he beats his wife. With teachings such as these and many other similar teachings, it's not surprising that 29 of the 35 countries with the largest gender gaps have Islam as their major religion. Women as chattel. Kerr claimed that it was the Sharia that ended the position of women as chattel in pagan Arabia. Since one of the bases for Sharia is the teachings of Muhammad, let's consider what Muhammad had to say about this. In the hadith below, Muhammad and some of the early Muslim rulers showed that the woman was completely uninvolved in the choice of whom she was to marry. Umar, who became the second caliph to succeed Muhammad, wanted to marry off his daughter, Hafsa. He offered her to Uthman, who became the third caliph. and then to Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph. Muhammad then demanded her hand, and she was married to Muhammad. However, Abu Bakr later assured Umar that he would have taken her if Muhammad had changed his mind, all with no input from Hafsa. Narrated, here we go. Abdullah bin Umar bin al-Khattab said, when my daughter Hafsa bint Umar lost her husband, I met Uthman bin Affan and suggested that he should marry Hafsa, saying, if you wish, I will marry Hafsa bint Umar to you. On that, he said, I'll think it over. I waited for a few days, and then he said to me, I'm of the opinion that I should not marry at present. Then I met Abu Bakr and said, if you wish, I'll marry Hafsa bint Umar. He kept quiet and did not give me any reply. And I became more angry with him than I was with Uthman. Some days later, Allah's messenger demanded her hand in marriage. I married her to him. Later on, Abu Bakr met me and said, perhaps you were angry with me when you offered me Hafsa for marriage, and I gave no reply to you. I said, yes. Abu Bakr said, nothing prevented me from accepting your offer except that I learned Allah's messenger had referred to the issue of Hafsa, and I did not want to disclose the secret of Allah's messenger. But had he given her up, I would surely have accepted her. So even the daughter of a future caliph was considered nothing more than a piece of chattel by Muhammad and the early Muslim leaders. And Muhammad is considered the perfect man whose example Muslims are to follow. Sharia protects civilians. Kara claims that Sharia introduced rules of warfare to protect civilians. Not really. Women and children. In terms of protecting civilians, much is made about the claim that Muhammad prohibiting the killing of women and children. I examined this claim by taking chronological approach to this. I is Dr. Stephen Kirby. It's not me. Dr. Stephen Kirby examined the claim by taking a chronological approach to Muslim battles and raids and Muhammad's statements about women and children from 624 to 632. The reality is that during Muhammad's lifetime, he both approved and prohibited the killing of women and children. Protecting women and children was a situational decision on Muhammad's part. This was summed up well in the essay, quote, the clarification regarding intentionally targeting women and children, where there is a chapter providing examples of allowable ways of both intentionally and, believe it or not, unintentionally killing women and children. This chapter ended with an apt summary of this issue. Quote, these are some of the situations which are exceptions to the general prohibition against killing women and children of the kuffar, the unbelievers. Amongst these situations, it's permissible to sometimes kill them intentionally and also unintentionally, as long as there is masala, benefit, in this case, greater than the benefit of enslaving them, for the Muslims and Mujahideen in doing so. So all these prove that the protection of their blood is not unrestricted, unlike prohibition of fornication and sodomy and the likes, which are unrestricted, forbidden. Rather, the Sharia of Islam has made the blood of their women and children permissible in these exceptions. So this reveals the mistake of people who claim that their protection is unrestricted and absolute. So in spite of Kara's claim, the reality is that Sharia has created exceptions where women and children can be intentionally killed. Beheading Jewish combatants and non-combatants. In March of 627, Muhammad supervised the beheading of 600 to 900 captured Jewish males from the defeated Banu Qurayza tribe, as it was later described. The messenger of God breakfasted at the market and gave instructions for a furrow to be dug there in which to bury those to be killed. The messenger of God sat with the distinguished among his companions. He called for the men of the Banu Qurayza, and they came out as a leisurely pace, and their heads were cut off. Muhammad had ordered that all the males who had reached puberty were to be killed, whether combatant or non-combatant, and one prepubescent survivor later related. It was narrated from Sutliffian. Abdul Malik bin Umar narrated to us. Ati al-Qurayza narrated to me, he said, I was among the captives of Banu Qurayza, and they examined us. Those who had pubic hair, which started to grow, were executed. and those whose pubic hair had not started to grow were not executed. He said, I was among those who had not had pubic hair grow. It was a hot summer day, and eventually Muhammad felt some compassion for those waiting to be beheaded. The messenger of God said, be good to your captives. Let them rest. Quench their thirst until they are cool. Then kill who remain. Do not apply both the heat of the sun and the heat of the weapons. It was a summer day. They let them rest. They quenched their thirst and fed them. When they were cool, the messenger of God began to kill those who were left. Yeah. Muhammad ordered the torture of 3 Jewish civilians. After the conquest of Khaybar in 628, Muhammad ordered the torture of 3 Jewish civilians. It began with Muhammad asking Sayyah ibn Ammar about a bag of treasure. What's become of the bag which Hayya brought from the Banu Dandir? To this, Sayyah answered, wars and expenses have emptied it. But the Prophet remarked it was a short time and a big sum of money. However, Hayya was killed before that. The Prophet then turned Sayyah over to Zubair and later put him to torture. As a result of the torture, Sayyah revealed where some of the treasure was hidden. It had been hidden by Kinyan bin al-Arabi, who had earlier denied knowing anything about the treasure. After the treasure was found by the Muslims, Muhammad ordered the torture and killing of bin al-Arabi for having denied any knowledge. So they tortured him. They got what they wanted. They were for the purpose of theft. That's permissible. Well, Muhammad did it. Muhammad ordered the killing of civilians. Muhammad gave an order to kill an old non-Muslim man. Quote, it was reported from Al-Hassan, from Sumara bin Jundab, who said, the messenger of Allah said, kill the old polytheists, but spare their children. Muhammad personally ordered the killing of 4 civilians, non-Muslims, who had criticized him, Azmat bin Marwan, Abu Fafak, Kabab al-Ashraf, Abu Rafi, and after the Muslim conquest of Mecca in 630, Muhammad killed some civilians who had criticized him. Allah's messengers killed some men in Mecca who used to satirize and harm him, and the poets who survived fled in all directions for their lives. According to Cantor, the teachings of Muhammad are one of the 4 bases for Sharia. In spite of Cantor's claim, Muhammad's teachings show a disregard for the protection of civilians. Jihad does not mean holy war. Jihad was the second word that Cantor claimed was being either ignorantly or deliberately abused. Cantor wrote, as for jihad, it literally means striving. It does not mean holy war. Where for many years, Cantor has been distributing a Quran translation, the message of the Quran. The Cantor claims enhances the understanding of Islam in America. As of 2016, Cantor had distributed over 130,000 copies of this Quran. Here are some interesting footnotes found in that Quran. Quote, the earliest and therefore fundamental Quranic reference to the question of jihad or holy war, that comes from the message of the Quran, number 167, page 51. Quote, he was taken prisoner in a jihad, that is, holy war. Are you catching this? A woman taken captive in a holy war. So in spite of what Cantor claims for many years, Cantor has been equating jihad with holy war in the Quran translation it is promoting and distributing for the sake of enhancing the understanding of Islam in America. Anti-Muslim, xenophobic bile. Cantor was very critical of statements made by Fox News' Tucker Carlson, a guest of Carlson's name, J.D. Vance, in regard to the Afghan refugees coming to the United States. Cantor wrote, the attitudes of the Afghan refugees are very different from those of most Americans. Carlson said, citing a Pew poll, he said that 99% of Afghan Muslims support, for example, the enacting of Sharia law. J.D. Vance then joined the fun. He alleged that 40% of Afghans believe that suicide bombing is a reasonable way to solve a problem. Who wants people like that in their community? According to Cantor, these statements were examples of anti-Muslim, xenophobic bile. But the reality is that Carlson was accurately quoting from the Pew Research Center, and Vance was quoting from the same report, although in that report, the actual percentage of Afghans who thought the suicide bombing in defense of Islam was often or sometimes justified was 39%. For more information about this additional disturbing information about the attitudes and beliefs of Afghan refugees coming to the United States, you can read Dr. Stephen Kirby's article, Bringing in Afghan Refugees with All of Their Luggage. It would be best if CARE looked up its anti-Muslim xenophobic file charge with the Pew Research Center instead of those quoting from the Pew's own report. Conclusion. Dr. Stephen Kirby writes, CARE wrote in this op-ed piece, in the wake of the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan early this month, American Muslims are again seeking their religious language used in derogatory, inaccurate way by those in our society who are supposed to know better. It's true that no matter how many times we explain this, many bad actors will ignore and continue to misuse Islamic terms. They know the truth about Muslims, but they don't care. Religious language used in inaccurate ways by those who are supposed to know better. Islamic terms misused by those who know the truth about Muslims but don't care. As this article has shown, CARE has repeatedly made inaccurate claims when talking about the religious language of Islam, and since CARE repeatedly claims to be a Muslim organization representing the Muslims in the United States, one can infer that CARE claims to know the truth about Muslims and Islam. With this in mind, it sounds like the above statement by CARE is not a complaint, but rather a confession. Dr. Kirby, I love the irony. Love this piece, and I think it's important that people get this. It's, you know, a lot of what is said in this article is why I do what I do. It's why I report what I report, why I share what I do. It's because the truth has to get out, people. This truth has to get out. That's why, if you want to know more about Sharia, you want to know more about the social norms of Islam, what are the behaviors that are expected that disagree. My suggestion is you pick up my book, The Cancer of Civilization Jihad. It's available now on Amazon. That's my suggestion. There's 4 good reviews out there. There's some good reviews out there. So I'm just hoping, people would take a look and get this into your local bookstore, because you think about this. We've just brought 100,000 Muslims into this country. Are we prepared for what? Do we know what to expect? Another article that came out this week that really surprised me this week. I shouldn't say surprised me, because Patrick Dunleavy has been writing on this topic over and over again. Now, if you don't know Patrick Dunleavy, you need to go and buy a very important book. It's called Fertile Soil. I think that his book is foundational for an understanding of Islam and terrorism in relation to prisons in the United States. So this next article, again, by Patrick Dunleavy, comes from the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and it came out today. Quote, there is a growing evidence across Europe that terrorist prisoners are successfully deceiving professionals concerning their rehabilitation. This was the finding of a recent study into incarcerated terrorists' ability to deceive authorities as to the sincerity of their rehab. Hiding in Plain Sight by authors Ian Atkinson and Amanda Paul, dubbed the trickery disguised compliance. The authors point to several recent terror attacks in which the perpetrators were able to feign rehabilitation and win their release. Among cases examined were Bilal Tal, convicted in the attempted murder of 2 French prison officials. In 2016, Usman Khan, the London Bridge attacker, Sudesh Aman, the 2020 Streatham knife attacker, Kujim Fezul, a Vienna jihadi attacker who murdered 4 people in the city center, and Brusthorn Ziamani, who attempted to kill a guard in Whitmore Prison in 2020. Each attacker had participated in prison programs designed to rehab jihadis from extremist views. They were judged by authorities to have successfully been de-radicalized before being released from prison. Their deadly actions made clear that the terrorists had conned authorities. The political and human price of deceptive terrorism falling through the rehab net to harm again is incalculable, Atkinson and Paul report. Austrian Interior Minister Karl Nehammer described the extent of the deception in Fezula's case. He was arrested trying to join ISIS, but freed provided he attended a de-radicalization program. The perpetrator managed to fool the de-radicalization program in the justice system. Nehammer said to fool the people in it and to get an early release through this. How could authorities be so easily duped? Perhaps they had overlooked what they study had already acknowledged. Deception is implicit in criminal behavior. You'd think they would know that. Some 40 years ago, Bud Allen and Deanna Bosta wrote a book, The Games Criminals Play, to assist law enforcement professionals to understand and combating the deceptive practices criminals use to manipulate prison staff. As someone who has worked nearly 30 years in the criminal justice system as an undercover agent and as an administrator, I can affirm that there is an inherent, again, this is Patrick Dunleavy speaking, he can affirm that there is an inherent deceptiveness in the criminal mind that does not stop at the prison gate. When it comes to terrorism, particularly radical Islamic terrorism, there is no difference. John Cutter, the former assistant chief of NYPD's intelligence division, put it this way back in 2005. Terrorism is just a higher level of crime. That being so, we should not be surprised when imprisoned terrorists employ the same methods of other criminals used to get released. Deception is part of the jihadi playbook. In 2000, the Manchester Police Department, while searching the home of Abu Anas al-Libi, suspected of being involved in the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombing in Tanzania and Nairobi, discovered a document that has come to be known as the Al-Qaeda Manual. It outlines strategic behavior and tactics that a committed jihadi should employ to be successful in the ongoing fight against Western democracies. The manual encouraged deceptive behavior with fatwa stating necessity permits the forbidden. Yes, and that, my friends, is part of Sharia. Keep that in mind. In other words, the Quran may prohibit lying. A jihadi would be allowed to do it to accomplish his mission. However, the deception posed by jail jihadis in comparison to ordinary criminals presents an exponentially greater danger. Unlike the thief or the fraudster, the consequences of such behavior can devastate not just individual victims, but whole communities, the study concluded. And while a recent report on the UK's prevention program found that more right-wing extremists were being referred to the program than radical Muslims, Ian Ashton, co-author of the Counter-Extremist Project study and a former prison administrator, countered that the threat of radical Islam in terms of lethality and potential dwarfs extreme right-wing ones. Jailed Islamists often view prison as a crucible where their commitment to jihad is tested. Others have even taken psychology courses in prison in an attempt to learn how to manipulate the work of prison therapists. The study found fewer examples of non-Muslim terrorist deception. Akeson and Paul examined the case of Benton Tarrant, a right-wing right separatist convicted of the 2019 murder of 51 people in 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. In that case, authorities who processed current firearms applications failed to take note of the extremist views he posted on social media or conduct thorough vetting process by interviewing close friends and neighbors. Study also found limitations in accurate determining whether a terrorist has generally been rehabbed or is simply conning the system. People are not very efficient in lie detectors, it said, and the effectiveness of polygraphs is fiercely contested. I want you to think about this. This is scary stuff, people. This is the reality that is happening today. They are out there to deceive you, and they're getting out of the jails. In the next few years, a large number of formerly arrested terrorists, Islamic terrorists, are going to be free. A large number. We're talking, I think the last time I looked at this number, we were talking about 200 people. I'd have to check with Patrick Dunleavy. I believe that was the number, and it's something to think about. And that might be an old number because they may have already been released. Because you get 20 years sentence. Usually that's the max they give you. You don't get charged with murder. don't get charged with treason because you wouldn't be back again. That's part of the issue, people. They are not charging people with the appropriate crime. A terrorist who kills should be charged with murder. A terrorist who doesn't kill and plans it should be charged with treason. Terrorist who does the murder, why not charge him with treason? Because they're committing acts of murder and mayhem for the purpose of attacking their fellow citizen for the furtherance of Islam. They want an Islamic country. Well, that would go against your constitution or your whatever you have that's the foundational work of yours. Again, my suggestion is if you don't believe me, pick up Reliance of the Traveler. I also recommend buying a Quran. The one Quran I recommend, it's called The Generous Quran. It's translated by Usama Dakdak. Now, I recommend this book. I recommend that you pick it up and use it. Mine's a little dog-eared. Pick it up, people. Find out who's telling you the truth. That's what it comes down to. You have to be aware of things. That's your job to be aware. Now, let's keep going. I have, like I said, I had a lot of news. I don't know that I'm going to get through. Wow, it's only 7:43. Or it's almost all done now. I cannot believe we're there. Wow. Now I got to start thinking about which stories I have left to cover. Wow. Wow. There is so much. The UK this past week, in November of 19th, is declaring Hamas a barren terrorist group. Now, this becomes important. If Hamas is declared a terrorist group, which, again, if they have been in the UK, if that happens, they're in fundraising. Fundraising in your local mosque is stopped. Or is it? They might just call it Sama instead of Hamas. See, that was originally a discussion in the United States to just call Hamas by another name and do the fundraising. That's highly possible. And this, if you want information on this, the UK banned Hamas as a terror organization between the group's political and military wings. So you may be interested in that. It's something to think about. We've had it declared a terrorist group since Bill Clinton's day. Bill Clinton was in on that. So that's something to think about. Again, Hamas is a chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it puts a spotlight back on the Muslim Brotherhood. Unfortunately, most here don't pay attention to that. That is the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't think about it. Here in the United States, we have CARE, which is Hamas in America. Again, they don't think about it. They don't get that message out well enough, which is, again, sad. This article comes from France. France.fr. He was planning to... This is a teenager who was planning an attack at Stade Rennais, a Breton teenager in court. Rennais, a 17-year-old high school student converted to Islam, had prepared a terrorist attack plan at Rosen Park, the football stadium on the road, we would call it soccer here, on the road to Lorient. With the help of armed accomplices, he thought to recruit via telegram messaging. Arrested on January 16th of 2018 at his home in Rennais, he will appear with a co-accused from November 30th of 2021 to December 3rd, 2021 before the Special Juvenile Assize Court, which judges crimes of terrorism. On February of 25th of 2018, the Minister of Interior Gerard Collomb revealed that two plans for attack had been foiled in January by the intelligence service. One was aimed at great sports equipment. It was actually the Rosen Park, the stadium of the road on the road to Lorient. And Renee, on January 16, 2018, a 17-year-old high school student converted to Islam was arrested at his mommy's home, living in Renee, not far from the football stadium. Yeah, and he had planned. So why do these converts find the need to kill? It's in the Quran, people. And what's said last is most important. So all those peaceful verses you keep hearing about that really aren't peaceful, they get negated because what was said last overrules what was said first. That's part of how Islam works. And they'll keep saying, well, Islam is peaceful. But was Muhammad peaceful at the end? This is where you have to take them. If abrogation is the rule of understanding the Quran, then do you need to read much more than what was said last? Because if something was said beforehand, it contradicts. These are, here's the problem with doing that, trying to find out. Here's one of the problems with the Quran. And you should think about this. Most books you pick up, I'd say 99.99% of the books you pick up are in chronological order. Well, this book is in what was said shortest. Yeah. What was said longest is, again, by the size of the document determines where it is in the Quran. So here's another problem that Muslims run into. Unless they have really in-depth studied the Quran, they don't know which overrules something else. Worse yet, most of them are told not to read the Quran if they can't read Arabic because they can't get an accurate translation. So again, why are they doing these things? Because this is what their faith is telling them. It's not a big surprise once you read. My suggestion, if you're really having problems with what I'm saying, you consider it hate speech. Pick up my book, The Cancer of Civilization Jihad. Find out for yourself. All my citations are there. It's there for you to read, there for you to discover. And that, to me, is what's important. How about this in Vienna, Italy? Austria. An Italian woman of Kosovar origin who is 19, who has been family connections to the Vienna assassin Team F, has been arrested by the police in Milan for alleged terror activities. A young woman had been a staunch supporter of the Islamic State for 3 years, the police said. This article came out last week. The investigation was triggered by an intelligence report on the girl's husband, a 21-year-old Kosovar, whom she married in January and was related to the Vienna attacker. The police said hundreds of images of executions of unbelievers with beheadings were found on the cell phones of the arrested. It wasn't 10, it wasn't 20, it was hundreds. The woman described herself as a member of the terrorist group, the Lions of the Balkans. She wanted to sacrifice her life to the Islamic State. The woman who joined the group 3 years ago had made phone calls to volunteer to sacrifice her life for the Islamic State. The Milanese public prosecutor who led the counterterrorism investigation spoke of the woman's horrific phone calls. On November 2nd of 2020, the 20-year-old Team F killed 4 people with several firearms in downtown Vienna and injured numerous others, some seriously. The Islamic State sympathizer was shot dead by the police. Yeah. This is going to happen. The more you bring in people who have these belief structures, this is going to happen. Europe is discovering this. It is happening more there. It is not something they want, but they're discovering this is not going away. And it's increasing as their numbers of followers of Islam grow in their countries. Think about it. There is a hate crime reporting site in Austria, and they did some incredible data research. So here's what I found interesting about hate crimes that were reported. This is where it gets interesting. So the majority of hate crime, hate crime reported is, it's not anti-Muslim. In fact, anti-Muslim hate crimes are the smallest amount. That's according to the data in Austria. And anybody who wants this information can ask. I'll send it to you. It's just a lot of information. You know what? I'm going to share my screen for those on stream, because these charts say everything. So let me just do that. Share screen. Here we go. So take a look. There was 302 incidents reported in 2020. The green are violence against people. Gray is threats, attacks against property, racist and xenophobic, anti-Semitic hate, anti-Muslim hate, anti-Christian hate, gender-based hate, anti-gay hate, anti-Italian hate, anti-Roma. That's against gypsies. Okay. I looked at all of these anti-Muslim crimes. This is for the entire year, people. This right here, these last five, these five. I mean, if you pick 100, this is all of the reported crimes against Muslims right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's it. Or that's all that's filed in this. You sit there like, yeah, that's not very much. All these things should blow your mind. All right. Anti-Christian. Oh, wait a minute. Why again, are you seeing this? That was all of the anti-Muslim. This is all of the anti-Christian in Austria. The vast majority of these, the growing population, is against. It's just against the reality. That's the issue here. I am running out of gas and tired. I've been on for about 2 hours now, so I'm just going to say, please do follow up. Please do pay attention to the shows. Do watch The Cross and the Crescent. Watch Chris Claus and a bunch of other great people out there to stay informed. Your job is to be informed as a citizen. That helps you protect you and others. My recommendation, tomorrow we have Andrew Herod, Dr. Andrew Herod. Come listen to him around noon on BTR. And Saturday we have Usama Dakdock and Christy Johnson. Come back Sunday and Tuesday we have Erica Kafiristan, The Cross and the Crescent group. Come listen to that. On Monday we have Vito Esposito show. And on Wednesday we have Hank of Polysports. And you come back next week. I'm hoping to have another interview and another surprise. I want to say thank you for listening. Enjoy, and thank you for being patient and enjoying the time with me. God bless you all.